Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today we look at two old friends again. These are the two glaives I used to show you the, characteristics of 1816 versus 1831 model glaives in a previous video. But today I wanted to actually dive a little more into the specific history of these two glaives because it's actually quite interesting and we didn't touch on it in the other video. So, this one here is a 1816 modeled sword, modeled after the 1816, and this is modeled after an 1831. None of these are military issue swords. These are most likely French National Guard glaives. And I say most likely because there seems to be a degree of debate on these swords. As I mentioned in the previous video, glaives are really tough sometimes to fully identify. So, especially when it comes to these, which were custom-made swords. So these were not produced in mass by state facilities. These were ordered and customized by specific soldiers or officers. But what's interesting, I think, about these swords is their connection to history, and specifically the history of the French National Guard. This is a unit that has a not too long history, for example, less than 100 years, but it was present and often in the center of events through some of the most important events in European history, at least relatively recent history. So the National Guard, just to give a few quick history pointers, was founded during the French Revolution, at the start of the French Revolution, basically, and was a bourgeoisie militia, you could say. So I think the initial name for it was actually Garde Bourgeoise. So it was a militia made of middle class, perhaps relatively, I don't know if wealthy, but it wasn't a mass troops kind of unit. And actually it was initially commanded by Lafayette. So yeah, quite some historical pedigree there. It eventually went through a bunch of different changes. Obviously, this time in French history is full of turmoil. There's the Restoration, there's Napoleon after the Revolution, of course, then there's the Restoration, and there's the July Monarchy, a whole bunch of other changes, and with revolutions and uprisings in between, and the Franco-Prussian War, and so on and so forth, and it was eventually disbanded in the 1870s. So today there's no Garde Nationale as far as I can tell. These two specifically are from the July Monarchy period, so under the reign of Louis Philippe. And we'll see how we can determine that in just a moment as we look at the details. But actually, let's do that right away. So let's dive in. Okay, so as I already mentioned, these swords are from the National Guard. They're not official military versions. And so let's take a quick look at them both, even though we already saw them in a previous video. We have this version, which is the most similar to an 1816 glaive. We have the scales or feathers. We have the decorative rivets shape, at least the shape of the rivets there. And we have the three-fullered blade. This one is a little different. It's more of a combination of the two. So we have an 1831 style blade with the more similar to the 1816 type hilt. So what gives these away as being non-military issue swords? Well, the first thing is that they lack any kind of proof mark or maker's mark. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't there. Actually, I'll show it on this one. Many times these swords obviously don't have a spine on which to write the maker's mark, but lots of times you would have found it in this area here. You would have found the Klingenthal or Culot inscription. But as you can imagine, an etching here is way different than what you can do in the spine. So these were often very delicately engraved, actually not etched, sorry. So many times they rubbed away over time and cleaning and yeah, maintenance. So it could have been there, but it's not today. But what really gives these away as National Guard swords, especially this one specifically, is this floral decoration with these, I don't know what they are, but like some kind of vegetation. This decoration is typical of National Guard swords. This other sword here, this other glaive, doesn't actually have that same decoration. And what it does have, though, is a unit number. So this is a bit puzzling because I'm not 100% sure if the National Guard had, well, this kind of, if they punched in their unit numbers onto their hilts. And if they did, this number looks like could be a 340 or a 540 perhaps. Maybe it's easier to read on screen. But yeah, so there's definitely a mark there. I don't know what that is. But the unusual combination of 1831 and with this kind of hilt makes me think probably another National Guard sword as well, although it could have been a custom job. Now, in terms of dating, these swords can be dated precisely to the July monarchy. So this is the monarchy of the second last king of France, Louis Philippe. He reigned from 1830 to 1848. So these fall in that time frame, both of them actually. And the reason we can tell is that apparently this kind of decoration with a rooster on the pommel is very typical of the July monarchy swords, or glaives at least. And there's a whole kind of a war within a war of symbols, if you want, in this time. Initially, the first glaives had the fleur d'lis. These were then removed because, well, obviously, well, they didn't want the symbols of the kingdom, I suppose. And then during Philippe's time, they often opted for these roosters. Now, what's interesting about this kind of symbology is that, well, obviously the rooster is a symbol of France, but the fact that everyone ordered and customized their swords the way they wanted means that there's a very large variety of variations of this symbology. So we can see some differences even between these two. In this one, for example, the rooster is looking forward with in his claws. In one claw, he holds what could be the world, perhaps, but is often also described as a grenade. And here, it's hard to see, but it's what is often described, I think, as a lightning bolt. And you can actually see it a little better here. I think this is representing a lightning bolt. Although, until I read about that lightning bolt iconography, I actually thought it was just the ground. Yeah, so very typical symbology, but with many different variations. In fact, as you can see, both the roosters are holding the grenade and the lightning bolt, but this one is way more, well, way better defined, perhaps. Well, maybe not better defined. Actually, I think this one's better defined. But yeah, this one actually looks a little nicer close up. But from a distance, this looks a little fancier. And it even has this circle around it, which I don't remember where, but I read someone saying that they thought that may represent or be typical of the Paris National Guard. So there's a whole bunch of opinions, a whole bunch. Oh, and as you can see, rooster looking forward, rooster looking back. There's all kinds of variations. Forward, back, with nothing in their claws, with a circle, without a circle. But what they all have in common is that they all date to the time frame between 1830 and 1848. Okay, now another interesting thing about these swords is that, well, first of all, they're not sharp. And this kind of introduces my next point, which is the perhaps the misconception that these are tools. And they are tools in a sense. It's generally understood that they were used for foraging, for all kinds of work on the battlefield. However, what is often understated, I think, is their importance as status symbols. As you can see, these swords are decorated. Someone wasn't just happy with a random hilt, they wanted a hilt in a certain way with certain decorations, and these would have cost money. Not only money though, but even effort in arranging. If you're just using this to cut down brush or to get forage for your horses, you don't really care what it looks like. So there's something more to it. Moreover, the National Guard specifically was kind of a urban militia and also a bourgeois militia as well. So not a like lowly troops that are roughing it out in the fields with their tools and their horses and their cannons. So we have to think about these swords in their context, within the context of their time, but also in the context of the units who would have used them. So when we're looking at these, I highly doubt that these were made to be tools. These were made to be parts of a uniform, perhaps to be used as well, but also they were not sharpened. And yeah, and I mean, in these years, the National Guard was definitely in combat. Like in 1832, they participated in kind of cutting down a rebellion against the king. And in 1848, they actually instead supported the Republican Revolution. So, I mean, these guys were also fighting. They weren't just hanging around being cool. So the fact that many of these swords are often not sharpened and in actually very good condition too, to me says that this was more of a status symbol. Now, another thing that kind of confirms that, I think, well, this is my opinion, of course, this is all speculation, so feel free to disagree or agree, whatever. But these are rather heavy swords. Now, this one a little bit less. This one, I think, comes in at around 700 grams-ish, maybe 600 if I'm not, I don't have the measurements right here with me right now. But yeah, this one, however, weighs over a kilo, and it's a short sword. Nobody is going around wielding this all day, cutting down brush, because it would break your wrist. And if it didn't break your wrist, you would be exhausted after just half an hour. I get tired just holding this for too long. This one, I am very confident that it was not used, or if it was used as a weapon, it might have been used as early. You may know that many police weapons were not sharpened and actually usually built to be very heavy, and that's because they were almost sword-shaped clubs, rather than nobody wants to go around amputating their citizens, let's say, if they can avoid it. And usually a bump in the head with something like this will be more than enough to stop anyone from any nefarious purposes they may have set out with. As you may have understood, I'm quite a fan of the French glaive. I think it has one of the most elegant and beautiful shapes in modern, relatively modern swords. And yeah, I just find them a beautiful object. So I urge you, if you find one, to pick it up and you play with it or buy it if you can, because it's definitely worth it. So as usual, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope I'll see you soon when I publish the next one, and thank you for watching. Oh, and please like and subscribe if you can. I don't like asking for it, but it really helps.